All right, so this is chapter 11, and in chapter 11 we're going to talk about animal diversity. So there are some characteristics that all animals or almost all animals show. The first of those is that all animals are multicellular. So if you remember what multicellular means that it's made of more than one cell. Animals are also made up of eukaryotic cells. And a eukaryotic cell is a cell that has a membrane-bound nucleus and organelles. We learned about it back when we talked about cells in chapter 3 or 4. Animals have specialized cells for different functions. So you have muscle cells that do the job of muscles. You have nerve cells that are going to transmit impulses from through your nerves. You have skin cells. You have connective tissue cells. You have bone cells. All of these cells are specialized to do a specific job, but the job that your heart cells do is different than the job your skin cells do. The job your skin cells do is different than the job your nerve cells do. So all of these cells have different jobs. The fourth characteristic of all animals is that they have collagen surrounding their cells. Now, collagen is a material that is tough but flexible. So this collagen helps keep the cells in the right shape, but it also allows for a little more flexibility in the cells than like plant cells have or fungus cells have. That's why you're able to bend and move and all of that kind of stuff, because you have this collagen surrounding your cells that allows for that flexibility while still keeping the shape of the cell. The fifth characteristic of animals is that they get energy for life processes by eating other organisms. And we'll be talking more about that when we get into energy pyramids and things like that coming up in one of the next few chapters. But all animals get energy by eating something else, whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, whatever. But they have to eat something else to get their energy. They cannot produce energy. Number 6 characteristic is that animals digest their food. Animals can have real simple digestive systems, like a tube within a tube kind of system, or they can have real complex kinds of digestive systems like human digestive system, which we'll talk about more in the next couple chapters too. So these are the 6 characteristics of all animals. Now, there are a couple other things that most animals can do. And most animals reproduce sexually. If you remember back, if something is going to reproduce sexually, that means you have to have a sperm and an egg from different parents that are going to fuse to fertilize and form the baby, basically. Another thing that most animals can do is move at some point in their lives. Now, not all animals move throughout their entire lives. For example, jellyfish. Jellyfish as larvae are going to be attached in a position where they don't move. But when they grow up, then they kind of flip over and then are able to move. So even though they can't move through their whole entire lives, they can move at some point in their lives. So those are the 6 characteristics of all animals, and then the 2 things that most animals can do. We split animals into 2 groups. So the first animal group are the vertebrates. And vertebrates are things that have a backbone. Some examples of vertebrates would be things like fish, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, birds. All of those things have a backbone. The second animal group would be the invertebrates. And invertebrates are animals that do not have a backbone. Most animals are actually invertebrates. There are more insects alone than there are vertebrates in the world. Some examples of invertebrates would be things like jellyfish, insects, worms, snails, all of those things. So they do not have a backbone. The next thing we're going to talk about is related to the body plans of these organisms, and we call that symmetry. So how the body is organized would be symmetry. And there are three kinds of symmetry that we're going to mention. The first is radial symmetry. So when we're talking about radial symmetry, what we're talking about is that these body parts are organized around a central line. So like if you were to run a central line right through the middle of this starfish here, you would have all of these body parts organized around that central line. If an organism has radial symmetry, then they have a top and they have a bottom, but they do not have a head or a tail. And you can again see that here. There's a definite top side here. The underside would be the bottom, but there is no specific head or tail. Examples of organisms that have, animals that have radial symmetry would be things like jellyfish and sea stars and sea anemones, just to name a few. The second kind of symmetry is called bilateral symmetry. If something has bilateral symmetry, what that means is that it can be divided into two parts that are nearly mirror images. So like this butterfly. If we split the butterfly right down the center, this half and this half are almost exact mirror images of each other. Same thing with you. If we were to divide you right in half, split you so you had one arm on each side, you would be an almost mirror image. One half would be, your right half would mirror image your left half. Examples of animals that have bilateral symmetry would be birds and humans and worms and insects. Just again to name a few. The third kind of symmetry is asymmetry. If something is asymmetrical or has asymmetry, then what that means is that it cannot be divided into identical parts. So for example, right here you can see this sponge in this picture. There's no way that we can come up with to divide this sponge into equal identical pieces. So again, like I just said, the sponge would be an example of an animal with asymmetry. So another group of animals that we're going to discuss would be phylum Chordata. And phylum Chordata have 4 characteristics. So animals within phylum Chordata have to have 4 characteristics. Phylum Chordata actually consists of 2 invertebrates, and then all of the vertebrates are within phylum Chordata also. So 4 characteristics of all chordates. The first would be a notochord. And a notochord is a flexible, rod-shaped structure that supports the body. So here you can see it's this gray thing right here. The second characteristic of chordates would be a nerve cord. So again, you can see this hollow dorsal nerve cord running right here down the back of this chordate. The third characteristic of all chordates is that they have pharyngeal pouches. Pharyngeal pouches or pharyngeal slits would be right here on this picture. And then the last one is a tail, a postanal tail, which would be right here. All chordates have a postanal tail. Now, the thing about these 4 characteristics with the chordates, though, is that all chordates show these 4 characteristics at some point in their life. So it might not be there always, maybe only when it was an embryo. They don't all show at the same time, but at some point during the development of the chordate, it has these 4 characteristics, and that's what actually determines really what falls into this phylum Chordata. Okay, so like I said, the vertebrates fall into phylum Chordata also. And so there are some characteristics of vertebrates. And the first of those is a backbone. All vertebrates have a backbone, also called a spine. We kind of use those interchangeably in here, and I'm sure you have in your lifetime to refer to your spine as your backbone as your spine. But what its job is to surround and protect the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a big bundle of nerves, basically, that carries information from your body parts to your brain, and from your brain out to your body parts. So it's super duper important in that whole idea of communication between body parts within your system. The second characteristic of vertebrates is that all vertebrates have well-developed organ systems. And you can see that when we start talking about the human body systems next chapter, or I guess in 2 chapters. You'll really see how well developed our organ systems are. All vertebrates have those well developed organ systems. And that is the end of this chapter.